part so we all look cool.
What If Season 2 kicks off with a Nebula film noir episode that is frankly unlike anything else we've ever seen in the MCU, and I am so excited to show you all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in the Season 2 premiere of What If. Welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and I loved how this episode has given us a story and a genre that we have never seen in the MCU before, a film noir. Now, film noir is a genre that was popular in the very early 20th century, and it's one of cinema's earliest examples of an anti-hero protagonist. Film noir is characterized by dark shadows, conspiracies, detective stories, and a hero who is willing to break the law to enforce the law. Now, Nebula, voiced by Karen Gillan in the series, is a perfect choice to fill the role in the MCU. She started off as a villain and very slowly opened herself up to becoming a hero. But Nebula has always been very hard-boiled, and she's always followed a moral code. First, it was the code of Thanos, and then it was the code of the Guardians. So you'll notice that right from the first shot that this episode is heavily influenced by Ridley Scott's film Blade Runner. Now, that was a groundbreaking 1982 movie that featured a dying Earth, where Harrison Ford wore a very similar trench coat to the one Nebula wears, and he hunted down rogue robots called replicants. So the dystopian Los Angeles in that movie is always dark, it's always raining, and it's littered with bright neon signs, flying cars, and sleazy markets and bars. Just like Xandar in this episode.
This is Xandar. All we got are problems.
Now, of course, this is not the Xandar we know from the Guardians of the Galaxy. Xandar always had sunny, perfect weather, and it was the home of the good guys. Now, the protectors of Xandar are the novacore, and the 3 lights on their chest are a symbol of their trinary star system. This is actually part of the reason that it's always sunny on Xandar. But it also means that the light is an important part of Xandarian culture. Their military is called the novacore, like the supernova of a sun. Their ships look like stars, and they create shields of lights to combat Ronin's ship at the end of Guardians. And this episode perfectly uses this theme of light, which I'll explain as we go along. You know, I've always been a fan of what if and multiverse stories. Like, I love alternate history shows like For All Mankind, or even the very first multiverse movie, It's a Wonderful Life.
I've never seen it.
My God, you haven't seen It's a Wonderful Life?
What do
It's
you
an
mean you've never
amazing
seen It's a
movie. It's
Wonderful
like a
Life?
seminal
It's
Frank
insane.
Capra
It's so
film.
good.
You
I
have to
haven't
see
seen
that.
All right, I'll watch it on streaming. Would you look at that? It's not on any of the streaming services that I subscribe to. Makes me so mad. I mean, I subscribe to all these streaming services, and there's nothing on that I ever want to watch.
Yes, they do. You just have to use NordVPN. They're our partner for this video. Like, if you want to watch almost any movie, like one of my favorite Hollywood movies, Lord of the Rings, it's not on USA Netflix, but it is on in Australia. So you can use NordVPN to change your IP address to that country, and boom, now you don't have to rent the movie.
You know, renting movies is how we actually make money here, right?
I've been using NordVPN for 3 years now, and it's unbelievable how much time and money this app has saved me. For one, it's an incredible ad blocker. It's the only ad blocker I use. But also, because of NordVPN, I was able to cancel almost every streaming service I subscribe to. No more doing a trial for a new service or renting the movie. You're already paying for the movie, you just didn't know it yet. This is one of the many reasons I love having NordVPN as a sponsor for this video. They also offer threat protection, which protects you from malicious sites, downloads, trackers, and intrusive ads. Like, if you click on a suspicious attachment in your email, then threat protection actually deletes that download before it finishes, protecting your desktop from ever getting infected. And today we've got a special deal for our subscribers. If you go to nordvpn.com/ScreenCrush or click the link in the description, you get a huge discount plus 4 bonus months for free. And if it's not for you, you can take advantage of their 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, back to the Easter eggs. And then we go to the new and improved opening credits, and man, this is just packed to the brim with Easter eggs. We see this slow zoom in with some of Marvel's biggest characters: Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Iron Man, Thor, Black Widow, and Captain America. And then we get this awesome mirror crack showing all of these different realities. You can see Peggy, Jotunheim Loki, Heimdall, Gamora, Goliath, Zombie Wanda, Thor, Doctor Strange, Ultron, Spider-Man, and Tony Stark. Specifically the scene from Iron Man 2 where he's in the donut, and then Cap shield and a Hydra symbol. But then it cracks again, and we get a whole new host of characters. There's Topaz, Nick Fury, Shuri, Ant-Man, Ying Li, Nebula, Baby Gamora, young Peter Quill, Black Widow, and a new character from this season, Kahori. So this cracking and splitting symbolizes the splitting and cracking of the multiverse, which of course we saw happen at the end of Loki Season 1. And in case you haven't seen Loki Season 2, I'm not going to spoil how that ends for you, but let's just say the multiverse is still a-growing. And then it splits again, and there is a new shot of Iron Man, Obadiah Stane, Tony Stark, and a new version of the Red Guardian. Then we pan through the shards and we get to see even more. There's Hulk over here, and then Black Panther and Natasha. Now, I'm not sure exactly who this is, but I'm thinking it's an AU version of Captain America or Bucky. And then there's the Grandmaster, Odin, Bucky and Captain Marvel, and then we fly through all these pieces to see our guide, the Watcher.
Man, that is a lot of characters.
I know, man, isn't it great? I'm so excited for this season. And by the way, before we really get rolling here, I just want to say thank you guys for watching. We're so excited to cover this show. It's going to be hard to cover it during the holidays, but we are making it happen for you. And if you want to support our channel and you like what we do here, please visit our merch store where we design the merch ourselves. We have lots of cool shirts for you to check out. For instance, we have this brand new shirt to mourn the passing of the DCEU, showing a tombstone reading the DCEU's start and end dates, along with various items that maybe characters could have laid down in honor of this fallen franchise. And of course, we've got the Grogu and Den Where He Goes, I Go shirt. We have our variant hoodie with our very own variant ScreenCrush logo, the Fraser Beast shirt, the original trilogy, The High Ground. Our merch store is loaded with nerdy merch that we have designed for you. And shopping our merch store is a great way for you to support our channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let's get back to this breakdown. And finally, the intro ends with the Marvel Studios logo made out of cracked glass, symbolizing the multiversal prism the Watcher watched from in Season 1. Except now, we are all watching along with the Watcher. So, film noirs often begin with a murder, a dead body belonging to the hero's friend. In this case, it's Yandu. Now, this episode leads us to believe that Yandu discovered Nova Prime's secret and that's why he was killed. But I actually don't think that's the case at all. I think Yandu was murdered and then the crooked novacore cops wrote that data onto his arrow just to lead Nebula down this certain path. Because if Yandu and Nebula were friends, then she would take a personal interest in seeing this case through. Also, I'm not sure if this means that Yandu and Nebula were friends like in actual Marvel canon. The only time we ever see them really interact is in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, whenever Nebula cuts a deal with the Ravagers when she escapes from the Guardian ship. And then Garth Saul comes to collect the body, and he is voiced by the same actor who played him in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Peter Sufusix.
You didn't say that right, man.
I know, because I'm just a little dog.
Yeah, well, you know what? In fact, Michael Rooker, Jude Law, Taika Waititi, and Seth Green have all returned to voice the same characters they played in the movies, with Nova Prime and Groot being recast for TV. And then we get to Nebula's new origin story. So in this reality, Ronan betrayed Thanos before he acquired the Power Stone. In this flashback, we can actually see him looking down on Thanos' helmet. And after killing the Mad Titan, he apparently also killed Gamora, which left Nebula all alone in the universe. Now notice how Nebula is floating in the darkness of space until the light of the novacore rescues her. It's almost like a heavenly light that shines on her, setting up this episode's theme of light versus darkness. Now she was saved by Nova Prime, kind of her new parental figure. Now I don't remember if the movies ever say this explicitly, but I've always thought that Thanos saved Nebula like he did for Gamora. So Nebula is used to having adoptive parents who rescue her, but she's also used to these new parents being evil, setting her up to suspect Nova Prime later in the episode. And the creed that the Novacore swear is also filled with talk of following the light and fighting the darkness.
Seek the light, be the light, never stray from its path.
Now, just like in Guardians, Ronan has a major grudge against Xandar. We can presume that the Kree still signed the peace treaty that we heard about at the beginning of Guardians 1, and that Ronan was still a rogue element, wanting to kill as many Xandarians as possible. He brings his ship, the Dark Aster, to Xandar. Get it? Dark Aster, dark versus light. So, when the Xandarians cut themselves off from the sun, they are literally bathing their planet in darkness, but they're also slowly cutting themselves off from who they really are, their own moral center. In this darkened world, the Xandarians change. Nova Prime changes, but the planet is still littered with hexagons.
No, not the beast! Not the beast!
Seriously, they are everywhere. They're in the mainframe,
No, not the beast!
even inside of Nebula's skull.
Not the beast!
So, I loved how they transformed this once sunny Xandar into this jaded, dystopian world. Perfect setting for a cybernetic film noir in space.
Forget it, Nebula. It's Xandar.
Exactly, high five. Nebula returns to the crime scene to project her old memories, like we saw Thanos do to find information in Avengers Endgame. By playing a memory of his whistle, she is able to summon the whistle to her. And the reason it speeds toward her forehead is because the speaker would have been inside of her head, so the arrow would think that it was returning to Yandu.
Hey, then how come later on she can just use the arrow herself?
Because, like Kraglin, she learns to use the arrow with her heart. Now, like Nebula, I immediately suspected Nova Prime whenever she set Nebula on like a secret mission, because film noirs typically include conspiracy stories that go all the way to the top. Notice, too, that when Nova Prime goes on a secure channel, the cockpit gets darker, continuing on this episode's theme of the light versus the dark. Nebula goes into a seedy casino for information, another mainstay of detective stories. Like how Daredevil's always going into bars to squeeze goons for information.
Daredevil squeezes what in bars?
Criminals. He beats up criminals to get information.
Oh, I didn't really understand what you said.
Now, in this bar, there's some very easy to recognize figures. There's Meek with his knives for hands, there's Korg, and there's Drax. And it looks like Groot's having a lucky night playing space craps with a giant stack of chips in front of him. Way to go, Groot. But Rocket is nowhere to be found. Now this could be because this takes place before Rocket and Groot ever met, or maybe in the war with Ronan, poor little Rocket was killed.
And then he joined Lila and the others in the Great Beyond.
Yeah. So the casino is owned by Howard the Duck, who we saw cameo in all the Guardians of the Galaxy movies and right here in Avengers Endgame. Still bothers me that I missed that in our original Endgame breakdown video. And Howard also has the honor of starring in the very first live-action Marvel feature film in the 1980s.
This is obviously no place for an intelligent, sensitive duck.
So Howard the Duck was created by the great Steve Gerber in the 1970s, and his comics were amazing. Howard just kind of stomped around in the Marvel universe, sticking out like a sore thumb, and became such a cult figure that there was actually a campaign to make him president back in 1976. I would actually love to see a loyal adaptation of his stories in Phase 6 in the MCU. Now we see him playing cards, the same kind of cards that he used in the cameo game in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, where we saw him play with several other minor characters from the Guardians films and holiday special. And this is kind of appropriate because this bar is loaded with different cameos. Now they discover the data on the air is actually this municipal schematics, and that's actually a big clue that this was a conspiracy all along. Nebula searched the city's database and there was no record of any of this information.
Sorry, officer. There are no records of these schematics in any archive on Xandar.
When, like, most of that should have been common information that would be public knowledge.
What's in it?
Quite the hodgepodge, actually. Sanitation department, metadata, unpaid parking tickets, rush hour statistics, source code for the shield generator.
This means that Nova Prime would have deleted this information, or at least somebody else at the top would have wiped it from the mainframe server memory. And by the way, Korg is back to being funny again.
Not everyone who goes in comes out.
Which means that many of the people who enter these premises end up dead.
Like, I loved him in Thor Ragnarok, and I thought he was like low-key annoying in Thor Love and Thunder, but when this guy is not in the spotlight, he is a delight.
There was a second there where I was thinking, what am I gonna sing at her funeral?
So Nebula needs an expert code breaker, so she breaks out Yon-Rogg. Now Yon-Rogg was the Kree villain in Captain Marvel who manipulated Carol Danvers into serving the Supreme Intelligence. In the comics, Yon-Rogg is actually a longtime antagonist of Mar-Vell, the original Captain Marvel, and is even responsible for the accident that gave him his powers. So, like, they actually ended up mostly adapting that story into Carol's origin in the MCU. Now, at the end of Captain Marvel, Carol apprehended Yon-Rogg, and then it's not really clear what she did. She put him in a ship, she sent him back to his people. Now, it looks like the Supreme Intelligence must have frowned upon him losing the Empire's greatest weapon, Carol Danvers. But also, now we know that after that movie, Carol returned to Hala and destroyed the Supreme Intelligence. So following those events, the Kree Empire fell apart. And that would explain why Yon-Rogg became a criminal and why he's no longer serving in the Kree military during the events of the Marvels. And by the way, the Xandarian prison that she visits is not the Kiln. That's the prison where the Guardians escaped from in Guardians 1. But it was still built by the novacore and has very similar architecture and design. So to get him out, she even starts a prison riot, just like the Guardians did in their jailbreak. Yon-Rogg leads her to the novacore's underwater mainframe, and these hatches were a lot like the underwater vault doors we saw in Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation. And when he's hacking in, he says,
Come on, baby. Talk to me.
which is kind of how Tony Stark sweet-talked to Tractor back in Avengers Age of Ultron.
Hello, dear. Tell me everything.
The mainframe is a giant orb, fitting because this episode is kind of an alternate history of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and the MacGuffin in that movie was an orb. So the mainframe is so sophisticated that it just exists on its own, and nobody can actually interact with it except for Nebula because she is
Omega-class cybernetic organism.
Now that term, Omega-class cyborg, is really interesting.
That's interesting.
In the comics, Omega is the class of the most powerful mutants, like Apocalypse. So this implies that Nebula's hardware and software could hack into pretty much anything. In fact, the way the tendrils come out of her skull looked a lot like how her new arm was able to drive the high evolutionary ship in Guardians 3. I also thought it was just a bit out of character for Nebula to just turn her back on Yon-Rogg, so I was relieved when it was actually all part of her plan. Nebula wins in this episode by counting on her opponents underestimating her. And notice how after Yon-Rogg turns on her, she is completely plunged into darkness. And then Nova Prime reveals that she was the real villain all along.
What? But wait, if Nova Prime wanted to surrender to Ronan and Nebula looked up to her, then why didn't she just ask Nebula to open up the shield?
Because Ronan killed her sister and there was no way that Nebula would ever agree to surrendering to him.
Oh, okay, I see.
So after the bad novacore cops beat her up, they say,
End of watch.
which might be something that the novacore always say when they die. I mean, frankly, they die so much in the comic books that it would make sense that they would have their very own little expression for it.
It's kind of sad.
But this is also similar to something that is recited at funerals for the Night's Watch in Game of of Thrones.
My watch is ended.
Nebula does escape though, and she slips into the streets where people are actually protesting the novacore, which is weird. Like, they want the doors to open back up and let in the sun, which is exactly what the novacore is secretly trying to do. It doesn't make a lot of sense on closer inspection, but it does show how this society was on the verge of falling apart. Now, back at Howard's bar, a guy made of wood, a guy with scissor hands, and a guy made of rocks are playing paper, rock, scissors.
No pun intended.
You clearly intended that pun.
This is also paying off one of my favorite jokes from Thor Ragnarok.
Made of rocks, as you can see, but don't let that intimidate you. You don't need to be afraid unless you're made of scissors.
Also notice that, in his role as a car dealer, Groot is now wearing a bow tie and vest. And then the new Guardians of the Galaxy form, with Nebula affixing Yandu's fin to her head. And they do the typical Marvel badass team pose, and I love how Korg undermines this moment perfectly.
Right, so we all look cool.
And then he has another banger right after.
Are we allowed to do this? Seems a bit morally grey with the guns and all.
So Howard the Duck is wearing a Rambo bandana, which frankly reminded me a lot of Gizmo in the movie Gremlins 2. Welcome back, Korg. Now meanwhile, Ronan is engaged in his favorite pastime, posing majestically on a starship. Whenever Yanrog goes to open the shields, notice that he's actually back to wearing his Kree battle armor that he wore in Captain Marvel. Really nice of the novacore to outfit him with that as a reward for helping them out. So when these new Guardians infiltrate the same novacore headquarters that, by the way, we saw in Guardians 1, Groot pulls the same angry I am Groot maneuver that we saw when they entered Ronan's ship in the first movie. And later, Korg pounds these guys into the floor like Hawk did to Loki in the Avengers. And then Nebula reveals that she was actually in control all along. What? As she also gets revenge on Ronan for killing her sister. Now, as Nova Prime gets away, she is luckily able to snap this arrow in half, which is a neat detail because it means that Nebula can't just easily kill her in the episode's climax. Later, she tries to escape in a Star Blaster, the same ship from the novacore that fought Ronan in Guardians of the Galaxy. So these are made to look like stars. So it's fitting that in this episode, with the theme of light and darkness, the Nova Prime star falls out of the sky. Then she does the old Hans Gruber fall off of a symbol of the novacore, symbolizing her fall from power and the novacore's fall from grace, and how they betrayed their own ideals. And by the way, the episode ends with Howard the Duck actually getting to quack. So this episode is bookended with narration from the Watcher, once again voiced by Jeffery Wright. Now, in the last season, the Watcher played an increasingly important role in the show. At first, he stayed in the background narrating until the final 2 episodes when he accidentally entered the story. And in this episode, he begins the narration before it is taken over by Nebula.
And in his fall, he took Nebula's sister
along with him.
Which is another trope of a film noir. Pulp detective novels were often done in the first person, so the movies usually had the hero narrate the events. Well guys, I am so excited to break down this season of What If for you. I'm actually not going to be hosting every single video. Our own Colton Ogburn, the guy who lives in our television, he's trapped there forever but he does not know it. Colton's going to be hosting a lot of episodes too, but we're all going to be working on the behind the scenes. It's going to be so much fun. This episode is so great. I'm sure the rest of the season is going to be fantastic. And just a reminder, everybody, go to NordVPN.com/ScreenCrush or click the link in the description to get 4 bonus months for free and a huge discount. Click our link and get your computer protected today. Well, what did you think about the episode? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.